My name is Stilson. I feel like I've been through a lot in my life, and now I'm fighting terminal cancer, but just trying to do what I can with what time I have left and just help people find the joy in life so that they don't take everything for granted like I did at one point. So when I was 17 years old, I had a lot going on with my personal life. I had just met this guy that I really, really liked, but I was raised extremely religious, and we weren't even allowed to date before the age of 16. I mean, you really weren't supposed to be alone with a guy, that sort of thing. But I made a huge mistake. I slept with this guy. So I got invited to a church party. My best friend at the time knew that I had made this big mistake, and they kind of ambushed me. I had no idea that this really wasn't a church party. The assistant pastor was there, and they had me get in the back of this car. I don't know if I totally knew what was going on at that point, but we ended up at a church, the church I loved. I played the violin on the worship team. And anyway, they brought me to the basement and they put me in this little children's chair. So I was lower to the ground, and I didn't realize they would have so much control over. I couldn't get out of the chair. They were all praying for me. I kept saying, I want to go. I want to get up. And they would respond with things like, talking to me as if I were demons. And they wouldn't let me get out of the chair. And it turned into this almost mob mentality. There were probably over 30 people in the room. And so there were people waiting for us. And just going to a place where you really had felt like this is my home, this is my church. And then people making you feel like you're evil. It was a pretty horrendous thing. And it's taken decades for me to get over that. So I was raised extremely religious from the time I was born, basically, in this very evangelical family, Assembly of God. And we moved to Salt Lake and started going to a non-denominational church. I played the violin on the worship team, and I just absolutely loved going to this church. But then, I started making mistakes, and that's when I saw the other side of religion. It was really hard. During the exorcism, they kept asking me, what was my name, basically? What's your name, demon? They kept saying this over and over, and I wanted it to end. I kept saying, I need to get up. I'm terrified. They wouldn't let me up. And finally, it's so embarrassing, but I started saying all sorts of names, like rebellion, anger, anything. What were they looking for to let me out? And they finally let me up. It was probably almost an hour, I would say, of this. They let me up, and the next day the pastor called me into his office and he said, do you feel evil? Do you feel anything evil on you? And I just said, no, I wanted to get out there as fast as possible. It was just a few weeks after that I actually ran away from home. I went to school, I went back to church, if you could believe it, and people just treated me differently. The best friend who had told the assistant pastor that I had had premarital sex, she also went and told a bunch of people in my high school, and everybody looked at me differently because there was kind of a running joke at school. I was so religious, they called me Bible girl. I would have Bible studies at the flagpole every morning, and that's how religious I was. And so for people to hear that I had sex, there were a lot of people making fun of me, and I couldn't be there anymore. One of the hard things was my mom. She didn't realize that they had done this exorcism. They had called her the night before. They had planned this and asked her if they could pray for me, but they didn't tell her it was an exorcism. They didn't invite her, none of that. And so she didn't understand how bad everything was. And so I ended up running away. I lived in my ex-boyfriend's car for 3 months. And then we played our instruments up the California coast and saved money, and we got plane tickets to go to Hawaii, and we lived in Hawaii for 3 months too, just on the streets there, the Waikiki Strip. So for somebody to say you're evil, you have all these demons living inside of you, it really made me feel like a terrible person. It's kind of crazy looking back at the pictures of me then, because I was such a carefree, good, meek kid. And I was really just trying to make my way in the world, just do the best I could with the skills that I had. And instead of helping me, these people did something monstrous. I mean, now being 41 years old and looking back, I would never, ever let somebody do something like that to my children. I can't even imagine. It's just, it's heinous is what it is. And actually, I posted about this. I got brave enough to write a story about it, and I posted it on social media. And I had several people reach out to me and say that that same assistant pastor did exorcisms on them. And the strange thing was, all of us were meek kids who really were trying to toe the line and be good kids. And yet he picked us and he put us all in these vulnerable situations. The same story. We were all put in these smaller chairs where we couldn't get away. And so it's definitely affected me. It's been really hard for me just to accept myself and say, I'm not evil. I'm not a bad person. I'm just doing the best I can. The exorcism was absolutely the reason I wanted to run away. I just felt like I couldn't trust anybody who I'd been close to, especially the leaders of the church. I mean, here we're taught that we can really go to them if we need counseling or need anything, and they really betrayed my trust. So I did reach out to one person and say, I'm going through all these things, and she actually said, why can't you be more like so-and-so? And she talked about my friend who had actually told everybody that I'd had premarital sex. And I thought, well, gosh, I don't want to be like her, because she's the one who went and caused all these problems for me. So it just seemed like whoever I went to at the time, they were all kind of wrapped up in this religious society, I guess. And I just didn't know who to trust other than the guy I was dating at the time who I ran away with. I really felt like I couldn't go to my mom because she was extremely religious, and since then we've talked about it, and she really didn't know how bad this experience was, that it was an exorcism. She honestly just thought that they were praying for me. And we had some strange things happen at the church, so you would go there on a weeknight, and I remember this one time they had women who were all lying on their backs, and they were experiencing labor pains, right, during this worship service when they were praying, and they said that they were birthing spiritual babies. And so here are all these women screaming, and then there would be other people praying next to them, trying to deliver the spiritual babies so that people could accept Jesus. And I think it was really after the exorcism that I stopped really believing that Jesus was the Son of God, because I had loved church, I had loved Jesus, and I thought, wow, if my concept of Jesus seems to be so strong, and theirs is too, then where's the disconnect here? And so actually, even, I guess we'll talk about this later, but as I've been fighting cancer, I am no longer a Christian. And so that's been hard, trying to find my bearings as I'm facing death. So after the exorcism, I ran away from home with the man I was dating, and we ended up becoming homeless street musicians in Hawaii. There was a lot to learn with that. I didn't realize, I thought, gosh, you just go be homeless and it's in paradise, right? So it's warm there. You would think it's the perfect temperature. But remember the first night we tried falling asleep on the street, and the police came by and said, you can't sleep here. And I remember them just jabbing you in the side and saying, you can't sleep here. And so what we ended up discovering was there was a park down the way at the end of the Waikiki Strip, and people called it Homeless Park. That's where all the homeless people could sleep. And it was a scary place. We would take shifts sleeping, being back to back, so nobody would steal our instruments, and then also we didn't want to get hurt. But what we ended up doing at the end was we would sleep on the beach with the tourists all day, and then we would play music for most of the night and try to make money. Big Macs were $1 at the time, and so if we could just make $1 each plus some change, then we could eat a Big Mac per day, and we were pretty much set. So we were homeless for a total of 6 months. So 3 months in a car traveling up the California coast, and then 3 months in Hawaii. And so, yeah, it was a crazy experience. You learn a lot about people. They look at you because there's nothing they can possibly gain from you. And you find out the kind people and also the people who maybe aren't so kind out there. But I ended up getting pregnant while we were homeless, which is crazy. But we flew all the way back to our homes in Utah, ended up getting married, and we had a little girl. So we ended up getting an apartment together, but we weren't very far away from our parents at the time. Yeah, so we just faced reality and just started a family. So after we came back home, we had a little girl, and then we had another baby on the way. And the doctor called me and said that there was something about the ultrasound. So when a doctor calls you at home, you know that something is probably wrong. And they said that I needed to have an abortion. And I just was flummoxed. But they kept saying that our little boy had birth defects. And I was late in the pregnancy. They actually wanted me to drive to a different state so I could get an abortion. But I don't believe in abortion unless it's for very specific situations. And I needed for me to give my baby a chance. And so I went through with the pregnancy, and he was born with very severe birth defects, terrible birth defects. I didn't even get to see him right after he was born because he couldn't breathe. They whisked him through a window and actually rushed him to Primary Children's, which was the hospital right next to where I had him. And he lived for a while, but we had to take him off of life support. And that was a pretty terrible experience because he was doing so much better, and all of the veteran nurses at the time, they were off for Christmas, and so a newer nurse, she put milk accidentally into his lung instead of his stomach, and he got pneumonia. And after that, we decided to take him off of life support, and he passed away. So having a baby in the hospital is extremely hard, especially when you're doing your best to be strong. I had a baby at home too. She was less than a year old when her little brother was born, and so just trying to be strong was hard. But then I had people re-enter my life, people who had gone to the church that did the exorcism, and they were saying things like, you should have had more faith. If you were following Jesus, you wouldn't have a baby with birth defects. If you had more faith, he would have lived. A lady even came to his funeral and said that if I would have had more faith, that he would still be here and he would be fine. And yeah, that's really hard to deal with because we were already going through so much, and what we needed was support and kindness. And instead, there were definitely people in our lives who made it harder. But then other people too who were really supportive and kind. And still, I have friends who call me every year on the day that he died, and they're so kind and generous, just still thinking about me, even though it's been over 20 years. We were really young at the time when he passed away. I mean, early 20s, trying to go through this. And I was 19 when our little boy was born. And so trying to navigate that entire experience, it was extremely hard for me. I would have nightmares all the time that he was still alive, and I somehow forgot he was somewhere, and then he would die. And it was really hard at a young age to go through that. But then my husband at the time, he just couldn't handle it. And he started smoking all the time. And so we separated for a while. I did anything I could to make money. I mean, I shouldn't say anything, but I did a lot of things to make money. I mean, I even modeled for this stupid calendar. Like, what is that? I started training to be a diesel mechanic. I was working as a waitress, and so he wasn't even living at the house with us anymore at that point. I was just doing whatever I could to make the house payment, and that was hard though, because I felt really bad for him. I just couldn't stand seeing our little boy in pain, and then just knowing that there was such a high probability of him dying when we weren't at the hospital with him. At one point, I was with someone who couldn't handle life and what was going on. It was another problem with, and he ended up pulling out a sawed-off shotgun. I guess the whole story is I had said I didn't want to be with him anymore. I was really worried about my children and their safety. He was on, and I couldn't deal with it. But it was really hard because when you have children and you're with somebody, you're really looking out for your children and thinking, I don't want any of them to be alone with this person at some point. It's better if we're together. But it's not in the long run, especially when things start getting scary. And so I told him I didn't want to be with him anymore. And he ended up going into our bedroom. He slammed the door shut. I went in there and he had this sawed-off shotgun that he had at his head. He was going to commit suicide. And so I tried to talk him down, saying, please, we're going to work this out. We're going to work this out. And anyway, he had started to calm down, and I said, it's stuff like this. This is why I don't want to be with you anymore. And at that point, everything escalated. He ended up swinging the gun past my stomach, and he shot our bed, and he ended up getting arrested. I had to go get my kids out of school, and we ended up staying at a women's shelter. It was incredibly scary, the entire situation. And then even after we got out of the women's shelter, just not knowing if we would be okay. And I think the whole thing was where he was on drugs. It just exacerbated everything. It was so terrifying. And the women's shelter too, I said that we'll do anything for our children, but I remember sleeping on this floor. It was a concrete floor, and all I had really was a blanket to sleep on. The kids were in bunk beds, but I didn't want them to sleep on the floor. So here we are for almost a month staying in this place, but I ended up getting a good job and we got out of there. I had sole ownership of the house at that point, and so I just did everything I could to keep the house so my kids could have that stability, and just fought hard for them. So I ended up getting a protective order against him, and just working, doing the best I can. I ended up getting my associate's degree and then started getting my bachelor's degree just as a single mom, and got an amazing job. And what's so neat now is that the kids are so much older. They look back at all of those experiences and they've told me that it really shaped who they are, not in a bad way, but they learned that when you're going through hard things, you can still find the joy. Joy is synonymous with perseverance, and that's definitely one thing I've learned through all of those experiences. When I was a single mom, one of my jobs was as a security guard. I had a couple of jobs at one point just trying to make my house payment. And this guy started coming up to the desk, this younger guy, but he was just this infamous bachelor where we worked. And he would have these parties. And anyway, he started coming up to the desk every morning at 4 a.m. And I couldn't wait to see him because he was hilarious. But I thought, this guy is just so young, what a darling kid. And then we ended up dating. He was 26 and I was in my 30s. What was I doing? But he's ended up just being the best person in the world for us. We've been together for over 10 years now, and he's just so kind and wonderful. I never imagined that I could have a relationship like this and just be so happy with somebody. And then for my kids to have a good role model too. He's been an amazing dad to them. So I've been married to my second husband for over 8 years now. And we've been together for 10. So a few years after I got remarried, doctors found out that I have terminal cancer. And that's been a lot to deal with, because when a doctor tells you you only have 2 years to live, everything starts looking differently. I think that I was able to look back at things like the Exorcism and say, oh my gosh, I wasn't a terrible person, kind of coming to peace with so many things that have happened in my life so that I can really appreciate today and not have these things weighing me down, forgiving the people in my life who maybe were abusive, and just saying, you know what, I've moved past that. I'm doing better. I hope that they're doing better, and just trying to find the best that I can, because the only thing that seems to matter is making a positive difference for the people I love, and that's become the most important thing to me. People repeat this all the time, but it's because it's true. Life is short. And when doctors told me that I'm dying of cancer, I realized that so much more than anybody. I was 37 and deciding I've got to change. I need to appreciate anything. So whether people are, in an abusive relationship that they've really been struggling to figure if they need to get out of it or not, or whether they're just going through something difficult, sometimes our problems aren't as obvious as terminal cancer, but just to think your life is short. If you were to die in a week, in a year, in 2 years, is this what you wanted your last times to be filled with? And if it's not, make a change. No matter what that is, make a change, because it's not worth it to look back like I have and been filled with regret. Thank God that I didn't die in a car accident, that I've had a little bit of time to change things so that my family, and especially my kids, can have memories where I've really been present instead of working all the time. Because, I'm just trying to do the best I can for them now. Life isn't so much about me anymore. It's about trying to leave good memories and a legacy for them. So when they're going through hardship, they can just appreciate what they have. So this is my book, Homeless in Hawaii. This is about all my experiences being a homeless street musician. And then, so I wrote a book about my little boy who passed away, and that's this book, The Golden Sky. And just, it's been amazing to see the reception of this and just know that his memory is still alive. It means a lot to me. And then, so here's my latest book. This is about my journey with cancer and just trying to find the good despite hardship. A lot of it just little God winks that have happened along the way, just to help me remember that God's looking out for all of us and it'll be okay. He has a plan. Sometimes I don't like the plan, but I still think God has a plan. I guess there was just one more story. So after my little boy passed away, looking back over the years on the anniversary of his death, I would get so sad and think of what it was like the day that he passed away, because he couldn't breathe anymore. He basically suffocated, and it was incredibly traumatic. But after about 10 years, when I looked back, I didn't remember the pain or the hardship or the sorrow. I just remembered this one day when he was holding my pinky. And what I realized was, when we look back at life, the only thing strong enough to withstand the test of time, it's not pain, it's not hardship, it's not anger. The only thing strong enough is love. And that's given me a lot of peace as time goes on, because I've just realized the incredible power of love. And it helps me know too that when I'm no longer here, I hope that's what will stay.